Perhaps this rejection was not an ending, but a beginning she hadn't yet learned to recognize. Ruth's boarding house was a large two-story structure with a wide porch and windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Inside, the entryway opened to a comfortable sitting room where a fire crackled in the hearth. The smell of stew and fresh bread filled the air, making Emma's stomach clench with hunger she'd been too anxious to acknowledge. "Ethan," Ruth called. "Come help with this lady's trunk." A young man of perhaps 17 appeared from a back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. He took in the scene, Emma with the twins, his mother's determined expression, and nodded double quotes. "Yes, ma'am." "Is it still at the stage?" "Right where that fool Hopper left it," Ruth confirmed, helping Emma remove her coat while somehow managing to support her arm that held little Michael. After Ethan departed, Ruth guided Emma to a rocking chair near the fire. "Now then, let me hold one of these little angels while you warm up." Too exhausted to protest, Emma surrendered Catherine to the older woman's capable hands. Ruth cooed to the baby while expertly checking her for any signs of cold exposure. "They seem healthy despite the journey," Ruth pronounced. "How old?" 6 months next week, Emma replied, relaxing incrementally in the chair's gentle motion and the room's blessed warmth. "They were born early and small, but they've grown well." Ruth nodded approvingly. "And their names?" "Catherine and Michael." "Michael after my husband. He died before they were born." Understanding filled Ruth's eyes. "And so you answered Oliver Harper's advertisement?" "Yes." Emma didn't elaborate further. The humiliation of her reception was still too raw. Ruth's expression hardened briefly. "Hopper's a prominent businessman here, but he's always been more concerned with appearances than substance. I should have guessed his sudden interest in finding an Eastern bride had more to do with impressing his business associates than genuine companionship." The front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air as Ethan returned with Emma's trunk. Another figure followed him inside, a tall man in a heavy coat dusted with snow, medical bag in hand. "Back so soon, Daniel?" Ruth asked. "I thought the Thompson boy was laid up with that fever." "His fever broke," the man replied, removing his hat to reveal dark hair threaded with silver and a face lined by time and weather, yet handsome in its strong features. His eyes, a deep blue that reminded Emma of summer skies, moved from Ruth to Emma and the babies with undisguised curiosity. "Dr. Daniel Winters," Ruth said by way of introduction. "My brother-in-law. Daniel, this is Mrs. Emma Richardson and her twins, Catherine and Michael. They've had quite the welcome to Riverdale, I'm afraid." Dr. Winters hung his coat on a peg by the door, approaching with a practiced eye that seemed to take in Emma's pale exhaustion and the baby's condition in one sweeping glance. "Mrs. Richardson was Oliver Harper's intended," Ruth continued, her tone conveying volumes. "Was." Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Harper was unprepared for children," Emma said quietly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. That understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes, followed by something that might have been anger, quickly masked. "I see." He moved closer, bending slightly to observe Michael in Emma's arms. "May I?" "Traveling can be hard on little ones." Emma nodded, allowing the doctor to examine her son with gentle, competent hands. His touch was professional, yet somehow comforting as he checked the baby's lungs, temperature, and reflexes. "Healthy little fellow," he pronounced, then repeated the examination with Catherine, who had calmed in Ruth's arms. "Both seem no worse for the journey, though I'd recommend plenty of warmth, rest, and regular feeding to help them recover." "Thank you, doctor," Emma said, relaxing slightly at his assessment. "Daniel delivered half the children in this territory," Ruth said with obvious pride, "including my Ethan, though that was some time ago." Dr. Winters smiled briefly at this, the expression transforming his serious face into something unexpectedly warm. "Ruth exaggerates," though I will say these two are fine specimens considering their journey. You must have taken excellent care of them under difficult circumstances. Mrs. Richardson, the simple acknowledgement of her efforts, something no one had offered since she'd been widowed, brought a fresh wave of emotion that Emma struggled to contain. She blinked rapidly, focusing on Michael's tiny fingers wrapped around her own. "Now then," Ruth said briskly, perhaps sensing Emma's fragile composure. "Ethan, take Mrs. Richardson's trunk up to the blue room. Daniel, you'll stay for supper." "I hadn't planned to," the doctor began, then glanced at Emma again. Something in her expression, or perhaps the twins' presence, seemed to change his mind. "But I suppose my other patients can wait a bit longer." As Ethan carried her trunk upstairs, and Ruth disappeared to the kitchen with Catherine still contentedly cradled in her arms, Emma found herself alone with Dr. Winters. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unasked questions. "I apologize for intruding on your family's hospitality," Emma finally said. "Once I've rested, I'll make arrangements to move on." Dr. Winters studied her with those perceptive blue eyes. "Move on to where, Mrs. Richardson?" The simple question laid bare the precariousness of her situation. Emma had no answer that didn't reveal the complete desperation of her circumstances. Before she could formulate a response that preserved some dignity, Michael began to fuss, his small face scrunching in hunger. "May I hold him while you prepare whatever he needs?" Dr. Winters offered, extending his hands with a confidence that spoke of experience. Surprised, Emma handed Michael to him. Most men she'd known, including her late husband, had been hesitant with infants, especially fussy ones. But Dr. Winters held Michael with practiced ease, speaking to him in low, soothing tones while Emma retrieved a prepared bottle from her travel bag. "You seem comfortable with babies," she observed as she tested the milk's temperature on her wrist. A shadow passed over his face. "I had a son and a daughter." He offered no further explanation, but the past tense told Emma all she needed to know. "I'm sorry," she said simply, understanding the magnitude of such loss. He nodded once in acknowledgement, then watched as she fed Michael. "Riverdale meets families, Mrs. Richardson. The Dakota Territory is hard on those who face it alone." "As I'm discovering," Emma replied with a wry smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps Oliver Harper's short-sightedness might prove fortunate for someone else in our community, Dr. Winters said carefully. "Someone who understands the value of what he so carelessly rejected." Before Emma could interpret this cryptic statement, Ruth returned with Catherine, who was now happily gumming a wooden teething ring. "Supper's nearly ready," she announced. "I've had Ethan prepare warm water for baths for the little ones afterward. Nothing improves a trying day like clean babies and a full stomach." As Emma followed Ruth to the dining room, she felt Dr. Winters' gaze follow her. For the first time since arriving in Riverdale, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wasn't the end of her journey, but rather an unexpected detour on the path to the home she sought. The warmth of Ruth's kindness and the gentle concern in Dr. Winters' blue eyes suggested that Riverdale might hold possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. Even Oliver Harper's cruel rejection began to seem less like devastation and more like deliverance from a marriage that would have been built on deception rather than understanding. As she settled Catherine in her arms and listened to the quiet conversation flowing around Ruth's dining table, Emma allowed herself to believe that perhaps the worst was behind her. Perhaps tomorrow would bring not just survival, but the beginning of something better than she'd originally hoped to find in this frontier town. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the blue wallpaper of the boarding house room. Emma woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, until the twins' soft breathing beside her brought reality rushing back. The events of yesterday, the humiliating rejection, Ruth Winters' kindness, Dr. Winters' thoughtful gaze, all settled over her like the patchwork quilt covering her bed. The twins still slept, exhausted from their journey. Emma slipped quietly from bed, washing her face in the porcelain basin and changing into her second-best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite fine. Her reflection in the small mirror revealed dark circles beneath her eyes despite the night's rest. She pinched her cheeks for color and smoothed her honey-brown hair into a simple bun, desperate to present a composed image that belied her inner turmoil. A soft knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Ruth Winters entered carrying a tray with steaming coffee, fresh bread, and preserves. "Thought you might prefer breakfast up here this morning," she said, setting the tray on a small table. "Those little ones still sleeping?" Emma nodded gratefully. "They rarely sleep this long. The journey must have exhausted them. Travel's hard on the smallest ones." Ruth agreed, pouring coffee into a delicate cup. "I've prepared bottles for when they wake. My Ethan found your formula supplies in your trunk. Hope you don't mind." "Of course not." "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Winters." Emma hesitated, then voiced the question that had plagued her through the night. "I must ask, what does your brother-in-law charge for medical consultations?" Ruth's eyebrows rose. "Are the babies ill?" "No, but his examination yesterday. I have little money, but I insist on paying my debts." Ruth's expression softened. Daniel wouldn't dream of charging for that. He was simply ensuring the twins were well after their journey. Emma's pride bristled despite her gratitude. "I don't seek charity, Mrs. Winters, and none is being offered," Ruth replied firmly. "Merely neighborliness, something in short supply from certain quarters of Riverdale." It seems, her tone made clear she referred to Oliver Harper's rejection. Emma sipped her coffee, gathering courage for her next question. "I must inquire about your rates for lodging as well. Mr. Harper mentioned paying for 2 nights, but—" "Harper sent money around this morning by his shop boy," Ruth interrupted. "Paid for a week, actually, though he included a note saying he'd told you differently." She sniffed disapprovingly. "Trying to pressure you into leaving sooner, I expect. Shame doesn't sit well on some men's shoulders. A week. 7 days to determine her next steps, to find employment or another solution in a town where her introduction had been public humiliation, where she knew no one except the kind woman before her and the enigmatic doctor who had treated her children with unexpected gentleness. A week gives you time to consider options," Ruth continued, seemingly reading Emma's thoughts. "Riverdale's growing. There might be opportunities for a capable woman." "I was a teacher before I married," Emma admitted, "though I doubt any school would hire a woman with infant twins." "Perhaps not the school," Ruth acknowledged, "but there are families who might value education for their children, ranchers and farmers whose homesteads lie too far from town for daily attendance." This possibility hadn't occurred to Emma. A flicker of hope kindled in her chest, quickly tempered by practicality. "Even so, I would need accommodation that allows for the twins, and I doubt private tutoring would provide enough for rent and necessities." Ruth hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There is another possibility, though I hesitate to mention it so soon after." "Recent disappointments," Emma steeled herself. "Please speak plainly. There are men in this territory, respectable, established men, who would value a wife with your qualities. Men who, unlike Oliver Harper, understand that children are a blessing, not a burden." Ruth smoothed her apron unnecessarily. "You needn't rush into anything, of course. A week allows time for proper introductions and considerations." The prospect of another arranged marriage made Emma's stomach clench, but she forced herself to consider it objectively. Her primary responsibility was to her children. If another match offered them security and a proper home, could she refuse based on her own wounded pride? "I appreciate your suggestion," Emma said carefully, "though I confess the thought of presenting myself for approval again is daunting." Ruth reached across the table to pat Emma's hand. "No presentations necessary." Simply join community gatherings. As my guest, attend Sunday services. Meet people naturally. Riverdale has good folk, despite your first impression. Before Emma could respond, Catherine began to fuss, her cries quickly escalating as was her habit. Michael would soon follow. The twins rarely allowed one to command attention for long. "I'll bring up those bottles," Ruth said, rising. "And perhaps you'd join us downstairs once these little ones are settled. The parlor gets lovely morning light, and my other boarders would welcome the company." After Ruth departed, Emma changed and fed the twins, her mind turning over possibilities. Tutoring might provide some income, but likely not enough. Another marriage could offer stability, but after Harper's rejection, the thought made her chest tighten with anxiety. And beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper fear that she had made a terrible mistake coming to Dakota territory, risking her children's well-being on promises penned by a stranger. Yet as Catherine settled contentedly against her shoulder, and Michael's eyes began to droop with satisfaction, Emma felt a stirring of determination she hadn't experienced since James's death. She had survived widowhood, poverty, and cross-country travel with 2 infants. She would not be defeated by one cruel man's rejection. Riverdale might not have welcomed her as Oliver Harper's bride, but perhaps it would accept her on her own terms, as a teacher, a mother, and a woman capable of building her own future rather than depending on another's promises. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in months, Emma Richardson began to imagine a life defined not by others' expectations, but by her own choices and capabilities. Downstairs, she could hear the gentle murmur of conversation and the clink of china, sounds of a household beginning its day with purpose and routine. Soon she would join that community, not as a desperate woman seeking rescue, but as someone with her own value to offer. The distinction might seem small to others, but to Emma, it felt like the difference between survival and truly living. The boarding house parlor was indeed bathed in morning light, revealing a comfortable room with well-worn furniture and simple but tasteful decorations. 2 elderly women sat near the window, knitting and conversing quietly. A middle-aged man in a railroad uniform read a newspaper in the corner. All looked up as Emma entered with the twins. "Mrs. Richardson," Ruth said, emerging from another room. "Allow me to introduce some of my other boarders, Mrs. Eleanor Parsons and Mrs. Judith Whitfield, both widows of railroadmen, and Mr. Gerald Hopkins, who works for the Dakota Northern Line." Greetings were exchanged, the women immediately rising to admire the twins. Emma found herself seated in a comfortable chair, Catherine taken by Mrs. Parsons and Michael by Mrs. Whitfield, both women cooing and reminiscing about their own children, now grown with families of their own. "Such beautiful babies," Mrs. Whitfield declared. "Look at these eyes, so alert and healthy. Not always the case with little ones who've traveled so far." Mrs. Parsons added, "Dr. Winters examined them yesterday," Ruth explained. "Pronounced them in excellent condition. Daniel Winters is the finest physician in 3 territories," Mrs. Parsons stated with authority. "Trained at Harvard Medical School before coming west. Could have had a prestigious practice back east, but chose to serve where doctors are scarce. After the tragedy, of course," Mrs. Whitfield added softly, then pressed her lips together as if regretting the comment. Emma's curiosity stirred, but before she could inquire further, the front door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Dr. Winters himself. He removed his hat, revealing hair slightly disheveled from the wind, and nodded greetings to the assembled company. "Daniel," Ruth said warmly. "Perfect timing. Coffee's fresh." "Actually, I've come on business," he replied, his gaze finding Emma. "Mrs. Richardson, I wonder if I might speak with you privately." A flutter of apprehension rose in Emma's chest. Had he discovered some concern about the twins after yesterday's examination? Her worry must have shown on her face, for he quickly added, "Nothing regarding your children's health." They seem remarkably resilient, slightly relieved but still curious. Emma reclaimed Catherine from Mrs. Parsons, while Ruth took Michael from Mrs. Whitfield. My office would give us privacy, Ruth suggested, gesturing toward a small room off the main parlor. Once inside the simply furnished office, with Catherine dozing against her shoulder, Emma faced Dr. Winters with as much composure as she could muster. "How may I help you, doctor?" "It's how I might help you that brings me here," he replied directly. "I understand from Ruth that Harper has provided lodging for a week, but your situation beyond that remains uncertain." Emma stiffened, pride warring with practicality. "I assure you I'm exploring options." "Of course," he nodded. "But perhaps I might offer one you haven't considered." He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "I find myself in need of assistance with my practice. Someone to maintain records, prepare basic remedies, and assist with patients when appropriate. Your educational background as a teacher suggests you have the necessary skills." Emma blinked in surprise. "You're offering me employment?" "I am," he confirmed. "The position includes accommodation. My home adjoins my office and has ample room. The previous doctor's wife designed it for a large family." Something like pain flickered across his face. There and gone so quickly, Emma might have imagined it. "That's unexpectedly generous," Emma said cautiously. "But I must ask, would the arrangement accommodate my children?" "They require considerable attention. I had assumed the position would include the twins," Dr. Winters replied. "In fact, their presence would be an advantage. Many of my patients are mothers with young children who might feel more comfortable seeing your babies thriving under the same roof where they seek treatment." The offer seemed almost too perfect, raising Emma's suspicions. "Forgive my directness, doctor, but why would you extend such an opportunity to a complete stranger?" His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Qualified help is scarce in Riverdale. You're educated, obviously capable, and in need of a situation that accommodates your children. Our needs align." It was a practical answer, yet Emma sensed something unspoken beneath it. Still, she couldn't deny the position solved her most pressing concerns: shelter, income, and the ability to care for her children while working. "I would need to consider your offer carefully," she said finally. "Perhaps visit your home and office to better understand the duties involved." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "Would this afternoon be convenient?" "I have appointments until noon, but afterward I could show you the facilities." They arranged a time, and Dr. Winters departed shortly after, leaving Emma to face the curious gazes of Ruth and her boarders. She explained the doctor's proposal as simply as possible, downplaying its fortuitous timing. "Well," Mrs. Parsons exclaimed when Emma finished, "that's Daniel for you, always seeing possibilities where others see problems. It would be a respectable position." Mrs. Whitfield added approvingly, "and far better than accepting another marriage proposal out of desperation." "Judith," Ruth scolded with a glance toward Emma. "Oh, I mean no offense, dear," Mrs. Whitfield said quickly. "But we all know why you came to Riverdale. And after Harper's shameful behavior, ... She shook her head. "Better to establish yourself independently first. Marriage can wait until the right offer comes along." Despite her embarrassment at having her circumstances so openly discussed, Emma found wisdom in the older woman's words. Dr. Winters' offer provided breathing room, time to establish herself in Riverdale before making more permanent decisions about her future. That afternoon, Ruth offered to watch the twins while Emma visited Dr. Winters' practice. "They'll be fine with me," she assured Emma, "and you'll think more clearly without them for an hour or two." Emma hadn't been separated from her baby since their birth, and the prospect both worried and relieved her. Worry won briefly, until Ruth demonstrated her obvious competence with infants. Settling both twins in a cradle she'd had Ethan bring down from the attic. "My sister, Daniel's wife, had her babies in this," Ruth explained softly as she gently rocked the cradle. It's good to see it used again. This second reference to the doctor's family stirred Emma's curiosity further, but she refrained from prying. Instead, she thanked Ruth and set out for the doctor's office, located on Riverdale's Main Street just past the church. The building was larger than Emma expected, a well-maintained two-story structure with Dr. Daniel Winters, physician and surgeon, painted on a wooden sign above the door. A separate entrance at the side presumably led to the adjoining residence. Inside, the waiting room was clean and orderly with simple but comfortable furnishings. Medical texts lined bookshelves along one wall, while framed anatomical illustrations hung on another. Everything spoke of competence and care. A young woman looked up from a desk near a doorway that likely led to examination rooms. "Mrs. Richardson?" she asked, rising. "I'm Nancy Cooper, Dr. Winter's nurse. He's just finishing with his last patient and asked me to make you comfortable." She gestured to a chair. "May I offer coffee while you wait?" "No, thank you," Emma replied, taking the offered seat and studying the waiting room more closely. The organization and cleanliness impressed her, as did the obvious care taken to make patients comfortable. Nancy returned to her desk, organizing patient files with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Winters mentioned you might be joining our practice," she said conversationally. "We've needed help since Mrs. Bennett left to care for her ailing mother in Minnesota. He's offered a position," Emma clarified, "though I haven't accepted yet." "I know little about medical practice." Nancy smiled reassuringly. "Most of the work involves organization and common sense, which Dr. Winters says teachers have in abundance. Medical knowledge comes with time." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Between us, it will be a relief to have another woman here. I'm only part-time since my husband farms, and some female patients prefer women present during examinations." Before Emma could respond, a door opened and Dr. Winters appeared with an elderly man who was thanking him profusely for something. After seeing his patient out, the doctor turned to Emma. Double quotes, "Mrs. Richardson, thank you for coming. I hope Nancy has made you welcome." "Very much so," Emma assured him, rising. "Good. I thought we might start with a tour of the office, then the residence, if that suits you." The tour was thorough and informative. The medical office consisted of 2 examination rooms, a small surgery, a dispensary for medicines, and a private consultation room. Dr. Winters explained the filing system, inventory procedures for medical supplies, and the basic duties that would fall to Emma if she accepted the position. "I don't expect medical knowledge initially," he assured her. "That can be learned. What I need most is organization, attention to detail, and discretion. Patient confidentiality is sacred." "I understand," Emma said, impressed by the systematic way he ran his practice. He led her through a door at the back of the office into a covered walkway connecting to the residence. The house was surprisingly large and well-appointed, clearly designed for a family much larger than a single man. A spacious kitchen with modern conveniences, a formal dining room, a comfortable parlor with well-stocked bookshelves, and upstairs, 4 bedrooms, including a nursery, still furnished with a crib and small bed. Dr. Winters paused in the doorway of this room, his expression unreadable. "This would be suitable for your twins as they grow," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "It has southern exposure, warm in winter, catches the breeze in summer." Emma walked to the window, noting the view of a small garden now dormant under snow. The nursery was cheerful despite its disuse, with faded circus animals painted along one wall and colorful quilts folded neatly at the foot of the small bed. This had been a room created with love, she realized, not merely furnished, but designed to delight its occupants. "It's perfect," she said softly, then turned to face him directly. "Dr. Winters, may I ask a personal question?" He seemed to brace himself, but nodded. "Your sister-in-law mentioned a cradle that belonged to your wife." And this nursery ... double quotes. She hesitated, unsure how to continue without causing pain. "You're wondering about my family," he finished for her. "It's a natural question, given I'm offering you residence in a home clearly built for children." He drew a deep breath. "My wife Elizabeth and our children, Samuel and Grace, died of scarlet fever 5 years ago. I was attending patients in outlying homesteads during a particularly harsh winter. By the time I returned ... He left the sentence unfinished, the conclusion evident. "I'm so sorry," Emma said, understanding now the shadow she'd glimpsed in his eyes. "It was a difficult time," he acknowledged, his composure admirable despite the obvious pain. "For years, I maintained this house exactly as they left it. Recently, I've come to realize Elizabeth would have hated seeing rooms meant for living left unused out of grief." Emma nodded, moved by his honesty. "It's a beautiful home. Your wife had excellent taste." "She did," he agreed with the ghost of a smile, "and a practical nature that would approve of its use by someone who needs it." As they discussed the specifics of the position, hours, compensation, duties, and when Emma might begin, she found herself increasingly drawn to the opportunity. The terms were more than fair, offering the security she hadn't dared hope for just 24 hours earlier. Yet beneath her gratitude lay an unsettling question. Was she accepting this position because it truly suited her, or because desperate circumstances left her no choice? As if sensing her internal conflict, Dr. Winters said quietly, "Take until tomorrow to consider. Mrs. Richardson, this decision affects not only you but your children. I wouldn't want to rush you into something of such consequence." His consideration touched her deeply. How different from Oliver Harper's cold dismissal was this man's thoughtful respect for her autonomy, even knowing her precarious situation. "Thank you, Doctor. I shall give you my answer tomorrow." Emma extended her hand, which he took briefly in a formal handshake. "Regardless of my decision, your kindness has been unexpected." His eyes held hers for a moment. "Sometimes the journey we plan takes an unexpected turn, Mrs. Richardson. In my experience, those detours often lead exactly where we need to go, though we couldn't have known it when we set out." As Emma walked back to the boarding house through the crisp afternoon air, his words echoed in her mind. Her carefully planned future with Oliver Harper had crumbled upon arrival. Yet within 24 hours another path had opened, one that offered independence rather than subservience, partnership rather than patronage. By the time she reached Ruth's porch, her decision was made. The next morning, Emma accepted Dr. Winter's offer with a clarity that surprised her. Within days, she and the twins were settled in the spacious rooms of his residence, the nursery once again filled with the sounds of children's voices and laughter. But as Emma quickly discovered, her new position would bring challenges she hadn't anticipated, challenges that would test not only her professional abilities, but her place in a community still suspicious of unconventional arrangements. Emma's first weeks at Dr. Winter's practice passed in a blur of new routines and adjustments. She mastered the filing system, learned to prepare basic remedies, and gradually took on more responsibility with patients. The twins thrived in their new environment, and Daniel, as he'd asked her to call him during their working hours, proved to be both an excellent teacher and unexpectedly patient with the children's occasional interruptions. But by early March, whispers had begun circulating through Riverdale's social circles. Emma first became aware of the growing opposition on a crisp Thursday morning when Mrs. Eleanor Parsons arrived at the office. Earlier than her scheduled appointment, her usually kindly face creased with concern. "My dear," she said in hushed tones as Emma prepared her usual tonic for joint pain, "I felt I should warn you. There's been talk at the Ladies' Aid Society meetings." Emma's hands stilled on the medicine bottles. "What sort of talk?" "Olivia Harper has been quite vocal about your arrangement here. She's been suggesting it's improper for an unmarried woman to live under the same roof as an unmarried man, regardless of the professional nature. Mrs. Parsons glanced nervously toward the door connecting to the residence. She's been rallying support among some of the more traditional members. A chill ran down Emma's spine, but she kept her voice steady. I appreciate the warning. Mrs. Parsons, Dr. Winters and I maintain completely separate living quarters, as would be proper in any boarding situation. Of course, dear. Those of us who know you understand that perfectly well. But Olivia Harper has a way of making even the most innocent arrangements sound scandalous. The older woman leaned closer. She's particularly bitter because she once had expectations regarding Dr. Winters herself. Years ago, this revelation explained much about the merchant's sister's hostility, but it also suggested the situation was more personal and potentially more dangerous than Emma had realized. That afternoon, the danger became more immediate when a delegation of 3 women entered the office, just as Emma was, preparing to close for the day. Olivia Harper led the group, flanked by Beatrice Campbell, the bank manager's wife, and Margaret Wilson, wife of the mayor. We've come to see Dr. Winters, Olivia announced without preamble, her pinched features conveying disapproval as her gaze traveled from Emma to the twins playing quietly in their corner enclosure. The doctor is making house calls, Emma replied professionally. He should return by supper. I'd be happy to schedule an appointment. This concerns you as much as him, Beatrice Campbell interjected, her tone sharp. We represent concerned members of the community. Emma straightened, recognizing the threat beneath their formal words. How may I assist you? By recognizing that your presence here has created an untenable situation, Margaret Wilson said bluntly. A young widow living unchaperoned in a bachelor's home, handling intimate medical matters with male patients. It violates every standard of proper conduct. My medical duties are performed under Dr. Winters' direct supervision, Emma replied evenly. Any intimate examinations are conducted only with female patients and only when medically necessary. The appearance of impropriety is nearly as damaging as actual misconduct, Olivia Harper declared. Your arrangement reflects poorly on Dr. Winters' reputation and sets a dangerous precedent for other young women in our community. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to remain calm. Dr. Winters hired me based on my qualifications and the community's need for additional medical assistance. The quality of care has improved significantly since my arrival. No one questions your competence in basic tasks, Olivia continued dismissively, but Riverdale has standards. We've come to suggest that you seek more appropriate employment, perhaps as a teacher's assistant at the school or companion to one of our elderly residents. The thinly veiled ultimatum hung in the air. Emma understood perfectly. Conform to conventional women's roles or face continued social pressure that could eventually harm Daniel's practice. I'll certainly consider your suggestions, Emma said carefully, though any decisions about my employment rest with Dr. Winters. Dr. Winters may find his own position in this community affected if these irregular arrangements continue, Beatrice Campbell warned. The bank handles the mortgages for many properties in town. Business relationships depend on community confidence. The implicit threat was clear. Pressure could be applied through financial channels if social disapproval proved insufficient. After the women departed, Emma sank into her desk chair, hands trembling slightly as the full implications of their visit settled over her. She had naively believed that competent work and professional conduct would be sufficient to establish her place in Riverdale. Instead, she had underestimated the power of conventional expectations and personal vendettas. When Daniel returned an hour later, Emma was still at her desk, mechanically organizing patient files while the twins napped nearby. You're working late, he observed, then noticed her expression. What's wrong? Emma related the afternoon's confrontation, watching his face darken as she described the delegation's threats. Olivia Harper, he said grimly when she finished. I should have anticipated this. She's never forgiven me for choosing Elizabeth over her 20 years ago. This isn't about ancient history, Emma replied. This is about my presence here, creating genuine problems for your practice. Perhaps I should consider their suggestions. Absolutely not. Daniel's response was immediate and firm. You've become essential to this practice. More importantly, you have every right to pursue work that utilizes your abilities rather than conforming to others. Narrow expectations. But if the pressure affects your patient's willingness to seek treatment, then we'll address the concerns directly rather than capitulating to prejudice. Daniel moved to the window, gazing out at the town's main street. There are more people in Riverdale who value practical results over social conventions than Olivia Harper realizes. We need to remind them of those results. Emma wanted to share his confidence, but the memory of the delegation's cold hostility lingered. What do you propose? Sunday's church service would provide the perfect opportunity to address these concerns publicly. Reverend Thomas has been asking me to speak about spring health precautions. I'll use that platform to formally acknowledge your contributions to the community's well-being. Idea both thrilled and terrified Emma. Public recognition would either solidify her position or make her an even larger target for opposition. You certain that's wise? It might inflame rather than calm the situation. Daniel turned back to her, his blue eyes determined. Emma, what we're building here matters too much to abandon because some people can't see beyond their own prejudices. Your work has improved the health and lives of dozens of families. That reality should count for more than Olivia Harper's spite. That evening, as Emma fed the twins and prepared for bed, she found herself torn between hope and apprehension. Daniel's faith in her abilities and the righteousness of their cause was inspiring, but she had seen enough of the world to know that being right didn't always guarantee victory. The next morning brought an ominous development. Nancy Cooper arrived at the office, visibly upset, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced by obvious distress. What's happened? Emma asked immediately. My husband received a visit yesterday evening, Nancy said, removing her coat with shaking hands. 3 men from the bank, including Mr. Campbell himself. They suggested that our farm loan might face additional scrutiny if I continued working in a practice with questionable moral standards. Emma's heart sank. The opposition was expanding beyond social pressure to economic coercion, a far more dangerous development. Thomas is furious, Nancy continued. He told them exactly what he thought of their threats, but ... She looked up at Emma with frightened eyes. We can't afford to lose the farm. If they call in our loan early, we'll have nowhere to go. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Emma's shoulders. Nancy's family faced genuine hardship because of her presence in the practice. How many others might face similar pressure? Perhaps I should resign, Emma said quietly. It would remove the source of their objections and protect you and Dr. Winters from further retaliation. No. Nancy's response was immediate and vehement. That's exactly what they want, to drive you away through fear and intimidation. If we give in now, they'll use the same tactics against anyone else who challenges their narrow ideas about women's proper place. Before Emma could respond, the office door opened and Daniel entered, his expression grim. I've just spoken with Mayor Wilson, he announced. There's to be an emergency town council meeting tomorrow evening. Officially, it's about maintaining community standards in local businesses. Unofficially, it's a trial with you as the defendant. Emma felt the walls closing in around her. What had begun as whispered disapproval had escalated into an organized campaign designed to force her from Riverdale entirely. Then we'll face it together, she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. If they want to air their objections publicly, let them explain exactly what harm my presence has caused the community. Daniel smiled for the first time that morning. That's exactly the spirit we'll need. Because I suspect tomorrow evening will determine not just your future here, but the kind of community Riverdale chooses to become, as Emma prepared for what might be her final day at the medical practice. She couldn't help but reflect on the irony of her situation. She had come to Riverdale seeking security through marriage, only to find herself fighting for the right to remain unmarried and independent. The battle lines were drawn, and tomorrow would reveal whether progressive thinking could triumph over traditional prejudice in this small Dakota Territory town. The day of the town council meeting dawned gray and blustery, with the kind of wind that seemed to penetrate every crack and crevice of Riverdale's wooden buildings. Emma rose before dawn, her stomach churning with anxiety despite her outward determination to face whatever the evening might bring. She dressed with particular care in her best navy dress with white collar and cuffs, an outfit that projected both respectability and competence. Her honey brown hair was arranged in a neat chignon that she hoped conveyed professional dignity rather than feminine frivolity. The mornings, patients seemed to sense the tension in the air. Mrs. Henderson, whose baby Emma had helped deliver safely just weeks ago, lingered after her appointment to express her support. "Don't you let them drive you away," she said firmly, bouncing her healthy infant on her hip. "Little Mary here might not be with us if you hadn't known exactly what to do when things went wrong. There's not a woman in 3 counties with your skill." Similar sentiments echoed throughout the day. Emma began to realize that while Olivia Harper and her allies had been organizing opposition, a quiet network of support had been growing among the women she had treated. Mothers whose children she had nursed through illnesses, wives who had finally received understanding care for problems they had endured in silence. They remembered, even if they lacked the social standing to challenge the town's prominent families openly. As afternoon approached, Ruth Winters arrived to watch the twins during the meeting. Her expression was resolute, her jaw set in a way that reminded Emma strongly of Daniel. "Half the town's buzzing about tonight," Ruth informed them as she settled Catherine and Michael in their familiar play area. "Harper's been making his rounds, calling in favors and making veiled threats about business relationships. And our supporters?" Daniel asked, adjusting his tie with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. "They're there too, though they're quieter about it. Don't underestimate the power of grateful patience, Daniel. Sometimes the people with the most to lose speak the loudest when it matters." At precisely 7 o'clock, Emma and Daniel walked together toward the town hall. The building was already crowded, with people standing along the walls when the benches filled to capacity. Emma noted the clear division in the room. Harper's eyes clustered on the left side, while their supporters had gathered on the right. The middle section held curious townspeople whose allegiances remained uncertain. Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. "We're here to address concerns raised about certain business practices within our community," he began diplomatically. "Specifically, questions about whether the arrangement at Dr. Winter's medical practice meets the standards our community expects." Oliver Harper rose immediately. "Let's speak plainly, Wilson. The issue is whether it's appropriate for an unmarried woman to live in an unmarried man's household while practicing medicine without proper credentials. It's a question of public morality and public safety." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emma felt dozens of eyes upon her, some sympathetic, others openly hostile. She kept her expression composed, though her hands clenched in her lap. Daniel stood to respond. "If we're speaking plainly, let's address the real issue. Mrs. Richardson is a qualified medical assistant who has dramatically improved healthcare in this community. Her presence has enabled us to serve patients who previously went without proper treatment. The question isn't her competence in basic tasks," Beatrice Campbell interjected, "but the propriety of the living arrangement and the precedent it sets for other young women. Mrs. Richardson occupies completely separate quarters in my home," Daniel replied firmly. "The arrangement is no different from a boarding house situation, except that it allows her to be available for medical emergencies at all hours. Boarding houses have established protocols and multiple residents, Olivia Harper countered. This situation creates the appearance of impropriety regardless of actual conduct. Emma had heard enough. Despite Daniel's protective instincts, this was her fight as much as his. She rose from her seat, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "May I speak on my own behalf?" Mayor Wilson nodded, clearly grateful for any development that might move the contentious meeting forward. Emma faced the assembly, drawing strength from the supportive faces scattered throughout the crowd. "I came to Riverdale as a widow with infant twins, seeking security through marriage to Mr. Oliver Harper, who had advertised for a bride in Eastern newspapers." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowd at this direct reference to her initial rejection. Oliver Harper's face darkened, but Emma continued. "When that arrangement failed due to circumstances beyond my control, Dr. Winters offered employment that recognized my educational background and provided suitable accommodation for my children." She paused, meeting the eyes of several women she had treated. "During these past months, I have assisted with dozens of medical cases, maintained precise records, and studied extensively to increase my knowledge of medical practice." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Women who previously avoided treatment now seek care regularly. Children receive prompt attention for injuries and illnesses that might once have gone untreated. I understand concerns about appearances, but surely the substance of our work matters more than adherence to conventional arrangements." "The question," interrupted Margaret Wilson, "is whether Riverdale should sanction arrangements that violate traditional standards of proper conduct." Before Emma could respond, an unexpected voice spoke from the back of the room. "I'd like to address that question." All heads turned as Joseph Miller, the town blacksmith, made his way forward. His weathered face was grim as he faced the council. "My wife Mary wouldn't be alive without Mrs. Richardson's quick thinking when she began bleeding after our last baby came." Doc Winters was 10 miles away at the Ensign place. Mrs. Richardson knew exactly what to do. Saved Mary's life before he could even get back to town. His voice hardened as he looked directly at Harper. "I don't much care about appearances when weighed against my wife's life." The statement galvanized Emma's supporters. One by one, they began to stand and speak. Farmer Thompson described how Emma had treated his daughter's serious fever when the doctor was unavailable. Mrs. Peterson tearfully recounted how Emma's discreet care for women's complaints had ended years of suffering in silence, even some of the undecided. Townspeople began nodding approval as the testimonies mounted. Emma realized that while she had been focusing on the opposition's social pressure, she had underestimated the depth of gratitude her work had generated. But Olivia Harper wasn't finished. Rising with theatrical indignation, she played her final card. "These testimonials are all very touching," she declared, "but they ignore the fundamental issue. What message does this arrangement send to our young women? That they can live with men outside the bounds of marriage as long as they claim professional necessity." The accusation hung in the air, more direct and damaging than anything previously stated. Emma felt the momentum shifting as doubt crept into some faces. That it was then that Daniel stepped forward, his decision made in that crucial moment. "Mrs. Harper raises an important point about propriety and community standards," he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the crowded room. He turned to face Emma directly, his eyes holding hers with steady determination. "Emma Richardson, I had planned a more private setting for this, but circumstances require directness. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, partner in life, as you've become partner in my practice?" Gasps echoed around the room. Emma's eyes widened in shock, but as she looked into Daniel's face, she saw not calculation, but genuine emotion. In that moment of public scrutiny, he was offering not just a solution to their practical problems, but his heart thought the answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she said quietly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I will." Applause broke out from their supporters. while even some critics appeared satisfied that conventional propriety would be restored. Only Olivia Harper maintained her rigid disapproval, gathering her skirts and stalking from the hall in dramatic protest. Mayor Wilson seized the opportunity to restore order. While it appears the concerns about propriety will be addressed through the most traditional means possible, unless there are other objections, I propose we consider this matter resolved. As the meeting shifted to routine town business, Emma and Daniel slipped outside into the cool evening air, still holding hands from their public engagement. That was quite a performance, Emma said when they were beyond earshot of the dispersing crowd. Though I can't help wondering if circumstances pressured you into a declaration you weren't ready to make. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting was expedient, he admitted, but the sentiment was entirely genuine. I've known for weeks that you had become essential not just to my practice, but to my life. Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. I came to Riverdale seeking security, expecting to sacrifice independence for stability. Instead, I found a partnership I never thought possible. Is that a yes under less dramatic circumstances? Daniel asked, a hint of vulnerability beneath his calm exterior. In answer, Emma rose on her toes to press a gentle kiss to his cheek, shocking in its public boldness, perfect in its timing. It's yes, without reservation, she confirmed softly. Not for appearance or convenience, but because I've discovered that love can bloom even in the most unlikely soil. Their return to the house was accompanied by congratulatory calls from neighbors and patients who had witnessed the proposal. Ruth greeted them at the door with a knowing smile that suggested she had anticipated this outcome long before either of them recognized its inevitability. As Emma watched Daniel lift Michael with practiced ease while Catherine babbled happily from her arms, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From rejected mail-order bride to respected medical assistant to beloved partner, each apparent setback had revealed itself as a step toward unexpected happiness. The battle with Riverdale's conservative element wasn't over, but they would face future challenges together. Their unconventional family forged not from traditional beginnings, but from mutual respect, shared purpose, and love that had grown stronger through adversity. The weeks following the town council meeting brought a whirlwind of activity as Emma and Daniel planned their wedding, while managing an increasingly busy medical practice. Word of their engagement had spread beyond Riverdale, attracting patients from surrounding settlements who were curious about the husband and wife medical team that had caused such controversy. Emma found herself caught between excitement about her approaching marriage and lingering anxiety about the challenges that lay ahead. While the public engagement had satisfied most critics, Olivia Harper continued her campaign of whispered disapproval, and Emma suspected that Oliver Harper was still seeking ways to undermine Daniel's practice through business pressure. These concerns proved justified on a bright April morning when Thomas Bennett, Nancy Cooper's husband, arrived at the office with disturbing news. "They've called in our loan," he announced without preamble, his weathered face grim with worry. "Campbell sent notice yesterday. Full payment due within 30 days or we'll lose the farm." Emma's heart sank. She had feared that Nancy's family would face retaliation for their continued association with the practice. On what grounds? Daniel demanded, looking up from the patient files he'd been reviewing. "Reassessment of risk factors," Thomas quoted bitterly. "As if our farm hasn't been profitable for the past 5 years. We all know what this is really about." Nancy, who had been preparing examination rooms for the day's appointments, sank into a chair with tears in her eyes. "It's my fault. If I hadn't continued working here after their warnings, ... This isn't your fault," Emma said firmly. "This is Oliver Harper using his business connections to pressure anyone who supports us. The question is, what can we do about it?" Daniel was already reaching for his hat and coat. "I'm going to have a conversation with Mayor Wilson and the other council members." They need to understand that allowing personal vendettas to destroy families crosses every line of decency. But when Daniel returned an hour later, his expression was even grimmer. "Wilson's hands are tied," he reported. "Harper and Campbell have been calling in political favors all week. Half the council members have business interests that connect to the bank or the mercantile. They're too afraid of economic retaliation to intervene." Emma stared at him in dismay. "So we're powerless to help the Coopers?" "Not necessarily." Daniel's tone carried a hint of determination that Emma had learned to recognize. "There might be another option, but it would require taking a considerable risk." He explained his idea, a direct appeal to the Territorial Banking Authority in Bismarck. If they could prove that the Coopers' loan was being called in for reasons unrelated to creditworthiness, the territorial government might intervene. "But we'd need documentation," Emma pointed out. "Evidence that this is retaliation rather than legitimate business practice." "Which is where you come in," Daniel said, meeting her eyes. "Harper's been careless in his correspondence with other business owners." Ruth mentioned that several families have received similar pressure. "If we could gather statements, proof of a pattern, double quotes, Emma understood immediately. It would mean convincing people to speak out against powerful interests, risking their own livelihoods to support justice. But it also represented their best chance of fighting back against the systematic campaign to destroy anyone who supported their cause. The next week passed in careful investigation. Emma and Daniel worked discreetly to document Harper's campaign of economic intimidation. What they discovered was more extensive than they had imagined. Nearly a dozen families had faced various forms of pressure: threatened loans, canceled business relationships, exclusion from social organizations, all designed to force them to withdraw support. From the medical practice, Mrs. Henderson, whose successful childbirth had been one of Emma's early triumphs, had been told that her husband's lumber business would no longer receive orders from Harper's construction projects. The Millers had been informed that the blacksmith shop might lose its contract to shoe the bank's horses. Even Reverend Thomas had been subjected to pressure from prominent church members who controlled much of the congregation's financial support. "It's worse than I thought," Emma confided to Ruth one evening as they prepared dinner while the twins played nearby. "Harper isn't just targeting individuals. He's trying to create a climate of fear that will isolate us completely." Ruth's expression was thoughtful as she kneaded bread dough. "Oliver always was thorough when he set his mind to something. But he's also arrogant. Men like that often overreach themselves." "What do you mean?" "He's assuming that fear will keep people quiet indefinitely. But fear has a way of turning into anger when pushed too far, especially when it involves hurting innocent families." Ruth's prediction proved accurate sooner than expected. The turning point came when Harper made a critical error in judgment. Young Timothy Morrison, the 7-year-old son of the town's most respected farming family, was brought to the practice with a severe injury to his leg. A farm accident had resulted in a deep laceration that required immediate surgery to prevent permanent damage. Emma assisted Daniel through a complex procedure that saved the boy's leg and likely his future as a farmer. The surgery was successful, but Timothy required several days of careful monitoring to prevent infection. During the recovery period, Harper arrived at the Morrison farm with an ultimatum: cease all association with Dr. Winters, practice and seek medical care elsewhere, or face the cancellation of the substantial loan that financed their spring planting. But Harper had miscalculated. John Morrison was not a man to be intimidated when his son's life was at stake, and he was well respected enough in the community that his opinion carried considerable weight. Morrison's response was swift and public. At the next Sunday service, he stood before the entire congregation and detailed Harper's threat, describing it as an attempt to interfere with life-saving medical care for personal reasons. "There's not a family in this county that hasn't benefited from Dr. Winters and Mrs. Richardson's care," Morrison declared. his voice carrying clearly through the packed church. If we allow business interests to dictate medical decisions, we're putting every child, every mother, every father at risk. The congregation's response was immediate and decisive. A petition began circulating that afternoon, demanding that the territorial authorities investigate Harper's business practices. By evening, more than half the adult population of Riverdale had signed it, but Harper wasn't finished. Recognizing that he was losing the battle for public opinion, he attempted one final, desperate maneuver. On Wednesday morning, Emma arrived at the office to find an official-looking document posted on the door. The Territorial Medical Board, it claimed, was investigating reports of unauthorized medical practice by unqualified personnel. Until the investigation was complete, the practice was ordered to cease operations. Emma's hand shook as she read the notice. If authentic, it would destroy everything they had built. But something about the document seemed wrong. The letterhead was slightly different from official correspondence she had seen, and the language was more formal than typical territorial communications. Daniel arrived moments later, took one look at the notice, and began to smile. "Harper's gone too far this time," he said with satisfaction. "This is a forgery and not a very good one. The Territorial Medical Board doesn't have the authority to shut down practices without a hearing, and they certainly wouldn't post such orders on doors like eviction notices." "Are you certain?" "Completely. But more importantly, forging official territorial documents is a federal crime. Harper's just handed us the evidence we need to end this campaign once and for all." The next morning, Daniel departed for Bismarck with a packet of documents, the forged closure notice, statements from families who had faced economic pressure, and a detailed account of the systematic campaign to destroy their practice. He returned 3 days later with a territorial, marshal, and a warrant for Oliver Harper's arrest on charges of document forgery and conspiracy to interfere with medical practice. The arrest created a sensation in Riverdale. Harper's attempt to forge official documents had not only failed, but had provided the territorial authorities with grounds to investigate his entire campaign of intimidation. Within days, the bank was placed under federal oversight, and several questionable business practices came to light. The vindication was swift and complete. The Coopers' loan was reinstated under its original terms. Families who had faced economic pressure found their situations restored. And the medical practice, rather than being shut down, received official commendation from the territorial authorities for providing essential services to an underserved region. As Emma watched Oliver Harper being led away in chains, she felt not triumph, but a profound sense of relief. The battle that had begun with whispered gossip and social pressure had escalated to criminal behavior, but justice had ultimately prevailed. "It's over," Daniel said softly, joining her on the office steps as Harper's wagon disappeared down Main Street. "This part is over," Emma corrected, taking his hand. "But we're just beginning to build something new here. A practice, a family, a community that values substance over appearance." Their wedding, scheduled for the following month, would mark not just their personal union, but the triumph of progressive thinking over entrenched prejudice. Riverdale had chosen its future, and that future included Emma Richardson, not as a rejected mail-order bride or a woman seeking shelter in marriage, but as a valued professional and partner in her own right. The twins, now crawling energetically around the office, babbled happily as if celebrating their mother's victory. Soon they would have a father who loved them not as obligation, but as choice, and they would grow up in a community that had learned to value character over convention. Emma's journey to Riverdale had begun with hopes for security and acceptance. She had found something far more valuable, the opportunity to create her own destiny and help others do the same. 6 months later, on a golden October morning, Emma Winters stood in the kitchen of her home. preparing breakfast for a family while autumn sunlight streamed through windows that no longer felt foreign, but had become symbols of belonging. The name change still gave her a quiet thrill, not because it represented ownership by another, but because it signified partnership, choice, and love that had grown from mutual respect into something deeper and more enduring than she had ever imagined possible. The twins, now walking unsteadily but with tremendous determination, had transformed the house into a place of constant motion and laughter. Catherine, ever the cautious observer, preferred to hold onto furniture as she navigated from room to room, while Michael threw himself boldly across open spaces, resulting in frequent tumbles that never seemed to dampen his enthusiasm. "Mama," Catherine said clearly, one of her first words as she pulled herself up to stand beside Emma's chair. "Good morning, sweetheart," Emma replied, lifting her daughter for a morning cuddle while keeping one eye on Michael, who was attempting to climb onto a chair that was clearly too high for his current abilities. Daniel entered from the adjoining office, already dressed for the day's work but moving with the relaxed confidence of a man whose life had found its proper balance. He scooped up Michael before the toddler's climbing expedition could end in disaster, earning a giggle of pure joy from his adopted son. "Mrs. Peterson is already waiting in the office," he informed Emma. "She's hoping you can examine her daughter, Rebecca. She's been running a fever for 2 days." Emma nodded, finishing her coffee. In the months since their marriage and the resolution of Harper's campaign against them, her medical training had progressed rapidly. She now handled most routine examinations independently, while Daniel focused on complex cases and surgical procedures. The arrangement served their patients well and allowed them to see more people than would have been possible with traditional practice structures. More importantly, the model they had established was beginning to influence other communities throughout the territory. 3 other towns had written requesting advice on establishing similar husband and wife medical partnerships, and the Territorial Medical Board had officially recognized such arrangements as beneficial. Innovations in frontier healthcare. Dr. Amanda Foster arrived yesterday evening, Daniel continued, settling Michael in his high chair while Emma prepared the toddler's breakfast. "She's eager to observe our practice before establishing her own in Deadwood." Emma smiled at this news. Dr. Foster was the 3rd female physician to visit their practice in recent months, seeking guidance on navigating the challenges of medical work in conservative frontier communities. Emma had become an unofficial mentor to women entering the profession, a role that brought her tremendous satisfaction. The success of their practice had attracted attention beyond medical circles. Emma's medical apprenticeship had evolved into formal training that would soon qualify her for independent practice, a development that would make her one of only a dozen licensed female physicians in the entire territory. After breakfast, as they moved through the connecting passage to the office, Emma reflected on how completely her life had changed from those desperate early days in Riverdale. The twins accompanied them as it became routine, playing quietly in a corner of the office while their parents worked. Patients had grown accustomed to the sight of crawling, then walking children as part of the medical practice's atmosphere, and many commented on how the presence of thriving children made them feel more confident about seeking care for their own families. Mrs. Peterson was indeed waiting, her 8-year-old daughter Rebecca looking pale and listless in her mother's arms. "She's been so tired," Mrs. Winters, the worried mother, explained as Emma examined the child. "And the fever comes and goes, but it won't break completely." Emma's trained hands moved gently over the child, checking for swollen glands, examining her throat, listening to her lungs with the stethoscope Daniel had given her as a wedding gift. "It appears to be a throat infection," Emma diagnosed, "but not serious enough to require Dr. Winter's intervention. I'll prepare a tincture that should reduce the fever and help her body fight the infection." As she mixed the prescribed remedy, Emma marveled at her own confidence in making such determinations. A year ago, she could never have imagined possessing medical knowledge sufficient to diagnose and treat illnesses. The transformation from desperate widow to competent medical professional still sometimes seemed dreamlike. "Mrs. Winters," Mrs. Peterson said as Emma handed her the prepared medicine, "I wanted you to know how grateful our entire family is for what you've done for our community. My mother never received proper medical care in her entire life. Too embarrassed to see a male doctor for women's complaints. Too poor to travel to distant cities. Having you here means my daughters will grow up with options she never had." Such comments had become common, but they never failed to move Emma. She had discovered that her work extended far beyond individual treatments to represent broader changes in how women thought about their health, their bodies, and their right to proper medical care. The morning passed with a steady stream of patients, routine examinations, follow-up visits, preparation of medicines, and the endless documentation that kept the practice running smoothly. Emma had mastered all aspects of medical office management while simultaneously developing clinical skills that impressed even the territorial medical supervisors who periodically visited to evaluate her progress. At noon, Daniel found Emma in the dispensary, carefully measuring ingredients for a batch of willow bark tincture that had become popular throughout the region for treating headaches and joint pain. "How would you feel about expanding our practice?" he asked without preamble. Emma looked up in surprise. "In what way?" "The territorial government has approved funding for a circuit medical program," Daniel explained, his excitement evident. "They want to establish regular medical visits to mining camps and remote settlements that currently have no healthcare access at all. The position would involve traveling to different locations on a rotating schedule, perhaps a week each month." Emma set down her measuring spoons, intrigued. "And they've offered this to you?" "To us, actually. The Territorial Medical Board specifically requested our partnership, citing the success we've had in reaching underserved populations, particularly women and children who might not seek care from a male doctor alone." The prospect was both thrilling and daunting. Emma had grown comfortable with their established routine, the security of their home base, the familiar rhythm of serving Riverdale's medical needs. But the opportunity to extend their reach, to bring proper health care to people who had none at all, appealed to her sense of purpose. "What about our practice here?" "And the twins. Traveling with small children would be challenging. We'd maintain our base here, of course. Nancy has expressed interest in taking on more responsibility, and Dr. Foster mentioned she might be willing to cover for us during circuit periods while she gains experience. As for Catherine and Michael, double quotes, he smiled. Frontier children are tougher than we sometimes give them credit for. And having a medical wagon equipped for family travel would actually make us more approachable in remote areas." Emma considered the proposal as she resumed her work. The idea of a medical wagon, essentially a mobile practice complete with examination, space and medicine storage, represented the kind of innovation that could truly transform healthcare delivery in the territory. "There would be risks," she said finally. "Weather, difficult travel conditions, potentially hostile reception in some areas. All true. But Emma, think about the impact we could have. There are mining camps with hundreds of men who haven't seen a doctor in years. Isolated farmsteads where women give birth without any medical assistance. Children suffering from treatable conditions simply because proper care is too far away." His vision was compelling, and Emma found herself imagining the possibilities. They had proven that unconventional approaches could work in Riverdale. Perhaps it was time to test those innovations on a broader scale. How long would we have to decide? "The program is scheduled to begin in the spring. We'd have the winter to plan, acquire proper equipment, and arrange coverage for our practice here." Before Emma could respond, a commotion in the waiting room drew their attention. Nancy's voice, raised in alarm, reached them through the connecting door. Dr. Winters. Mrs. Winters, come quickly. They rushed into the waiting room to find a man they didn't recognize supporting a woman who appeared to be in the final stages of a pregnancy and obvious distress. Her face was pale with sweat, and her breathing came in sharp gasps. Found them on the road about 2 miles out, the man explained rapidly. Their wagon broke down, and she started having pains. Name's Jenny Harrison. Her husband's back with the wagon trying to fix it. Emma immediately took charge, her training kicking in automatically. Nancy, prepare the examination room. Daniel, help me get her inside. As they settled Mrs. Harrison on the examination table, Emma's practiced hands quickly assessed the situation. The woman was indeed in active labor, but something was wrong. The baby's position felt abnormal, and Mrs. Harrison's distress seemed more severe than typical labor pains. How long have you been having contractions? Emma asked gently. Since before dawn, Jenny gasped. But they're different now, sharper, and the baby doesn't feel right. Emma exchanged glances with Daniel. Her examination confirmed her initial concern. This was a breech presentation, with the baby positioned feet first instead of head down. In a remote location, without access to a hospital, this could become a life-threatening emergency for both mother and child. Mrs. Harrison, Daniel said calmly, your baby is positioned unusually, which is causing the difficult labor. We're going to help you through this, but it will require careful management. What followed was one of the most challenging deliveries Emma had yet assisted with. The breech presentation required delicate manipulation to guide the baby safely through birth, while constantly monitoring both patients for signs of distress. Emma found herself drawing on every technique Daniel had taught her, every textbook she had studied, every instinct she had developed through months of practice. Nearly 3 hours later, a healthy baby girl emerged, crying lustily despite her dramatic entrance into the world. Mrs. Harrison, exhausted but safe, cradled her daughter with tears of relief streaming down her face. You saved them both, the woman whispered to Emma as Daniel completed his examination of the newborn. If we'd been alone on that broken wagon, double camel felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from successful treatment, but also a deeper realization. This emergency had demonstrated once again how desperately medical care was needed in remote areas. How many women like Jenny Harrison face childbirth alone, without any assistance, simply because they live too far from established practices? Daniel, she said quietly as they cleaned up after the delivery, I've made my decision about the circuit program. He looked up from his notes, eyebrows raised questioningly. We'll do it. The territory needs this kind of service, and we've proven we can work effectively in challenging situations. If we can prevent even one tragedy, like what almost happened today, it will be worthwhile. Daniel's smile was radiant. Are you certain? It won't be easy, and there will be times when we question the decision. Emma glanced toward the recovery room where Mrs. Harrison was resting with her new daughter, then at the twins, who had slept peacefully through the entire drama in their corner play area. I'm certain. We came to Riverdale by accident, but we've built something meaningful here. Now it's time to share what we've learned with people who need it even more desperately. As afternoon turned to evening, Emma reflected on the day's events while preparing supper for their growing household. Dr. Foster would join them, eager to discuss the challenges and opportunities of frontier medical practice. Nancy and Thomas Cooper would be there as well, celebrating the restoration of their farm and Thomas's new position as medical wagon driver for the circuit program. The meal would be crowded, lively, and full of planning for the future, much like Emma's life had become since that bitter winter day when she'd arrived in Riverdale as a rejected mail-order bride. Looking back, she could see how each apparent setback had actually been a step towards something better than she could have originally imagined. Oliver Harper's rejection had freed her from a marriage that would have stifled her potential. The controversy over her medical training had forced the community to examine its assumptions about women's capabilities. Even Harper's criminal campaign against them had ultimately strengthened their position and expanded their influence. As she watched Daniel playing with Catherine and Michael while simultaneously discussing medical theories with Dr. Foster, Emma marveled at the completeness of her transformation. She had come to Dakota Territory seeking security for her children and had found that, but also much more: professional fulfillment, genuine partnership, and a love that had grown stronger through shared challenges. The twins, now toddling confidently around the kitchen, chattered to each other in their private language while investigating every corner and crevice they could reach. Soon they would be old enough to understand the stories of their parents' courtship, the community battle that had brought them together, and the work that gave their lives meaning beyond personal happiness. Tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, and continued preparation for the circuit program that would expand their reach across the territory. There would be difficult days ahead: harsh weather, dangerous travel, skeptical communities resistant to change. But Emma faced the future with confidence born from experience and partnership. She had learned that the most meaningful journeys often begin with apparent disasters. That strength could be found in the most unlikely circumstances, and that love grew strongest when it was built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than desperate need or social convention. As the golden autumn light faded outside their windows and the warmth of family conversation filled their home, Emma Winters understood that she had found something more precious than the security she had originally sought. She had found her place in the world, not as someone's dependent or charity case, but as a valued partner in work that mattered, a respected member of a community she had helped to change, and a woman who had created her own destiny despite overwhelming odds. The mail-order bride who had arrived with twin babies and broken dreams had become something she never could have imagined. A pioneer in her own right, opening new paths for other women to follow. And in a few months, when their medical wagon rolled out of Riverdale toward distant settlements in need of care, that pioneer would be carrying her message of possibility and change to places where it was needed most. It was a fitting ending to one journey and an inspiring beginning to the next. We Try Claude Can Make Mistakes. Please double-check responses. Research Sonnet 4.